because what they saw on Christmas night 1980 made these thick-skinned military men shudder with fear. It's 3 a.m. Airman John Burroughs is patrolling the east gate of Woodbridge Air Base, part of his normal routine as a security policeman.
Security did the airfields, weapon storage areas, and stuff like that. You controlled the entry of the base.
The 20-year-old has been with the Air Force for almost 2 years and has been stationed at Bentwaters for about a year and a half. Tonight, there is nothing to observe but the stars overhead.
It was cold that night. It was a clear night, pretty much. You know, it was a clear night. There's a little bit of fog.
As he's walking, his superior, Bud Stevens, pulls up in a truck.
He tracked me down and said, let's ride around for a while.
The men drive into Rendlesham Forest. Suddenly, Sergeant Stevens notices a strange light in the woods just off the road.
He said, whoa, is that normal? And I looked out and it was just a weird glow in the woods. I said, no, it's not normal.
Burroughs can't shake a bad feeling.
You know, you just felt a real sense of danger or something wasn't right. There were different colored lights, you know, like you see on a Christmas display, different colored lights that were blinking on and off.
Alarmed, the men speed back to the gate to call the flight desk from a secure phone line. They do not want to broadcast the information over their radios. At Burroughs' insistence, the call is transferred to the base's Central Security Control, or CSC. The shift commander dispatches 26-year-old Sergeant Jim Peniston to the site. Peniston has been a security policeman with the Air Force for 7 years.
They told me I need to go out the east gate. We have a situation out there. I said, what type of situation? He said, well, I'd rather have the on-scene patrolman tell you what that is. I says, well, can it wait? No, you gotta get out immediately.
Within minutes, Peniston and his driver arrive at the east gate. Burroughs and Stevens direct his attention to the woods.
I seen this multicolor, yellow and red. It was about, 200-300 meters away. And it looked like an aircraft crash immediately. That's the color that you get from titanium and fuel burning.
Peniston calls back to CSC and gets clearance to investigate a possible downed aircraft.
If it is an aircraft crash, we can go ahead and, render assistance and set up security for it.
As part of standard procedure, Sergeant Peniston tries to gather information from Bud Stevens.
And I said, well, do you hear it crash, Bud? He said, no, it didn't crash. It landed.
Stevens is too frightened to help with the investigation. He returns to his post, while Burroughs and Peniston proceed without him. Soon after, they speed off with a driver and head toward the mysterious light. When they can no longer maneuver the vehicle around the dense trees, Burroughs and Peniston proceed on foot. They walk about 50 meters and notice strong interference on their radios.
The farther we got into the woods, it became more and more intermediate, where it was harder and harder to talk to him.
Suddenly, Sergeant Peniston feels an electrical charge in the air.
I've been in excitable situations before on duty, and I know the adrenaline feeling, but this here was different. You could feel it on your clothes, your face, your hair.
The closer they move toward the light, the less the scene resembles a crash.
Didn't have no smell of smoke, and it was too contained. It was just like one ball out there.
And we came into a clearing, and then that's when it was like a bright light lit up the whole area. It was almost blinding.
Sergeant Peniston moves within 10 feet of the object, and the bright light dims. As his eyes adjust, he has trouble understanding what he's seeing.
I'm a rational person. I wanted a rational explanation of what was going on. I could not come up with one.
Peniston snaps pictures with his military-issued camera.
The craft was triangular in shape and measured probably 9 feet wide by about 8 feet high. I couldn't tell the front or back to it. I mean, there was no engines on one side or no cockpit or nothing like that. It was all completely smooth, the outside of the craft.
He then circles the object, writing descriptions in a notepad. These are the notes he wrote that night.
Surface is unknown. Identity unknown. No apparent landing gear present. No sound, but appears to be operating somehow.
Peniston's handwriting changes dramatically as he gets closer to the craft.
I was really having problems with the type of craft. I keep saying it's unknown. I have a problem with understanding what I'm recording here.
When he draws near enough, he reaches out and touches the object.
The fabric of the craft was smooth, like glass. It was warm to the touch, but not hot. There wasn't like lights on it. Somehow it was in the fabric of the craft.
On the front side of the object, Peniston notices several strange symbols. He copies them in his notebook as well.
They were like markings, not numbers, not language. There were several, maybe 6 symbols, measuring 3 feet wide. I wasn't trained for what I was experiencing.
Suddenly, the object emits a blinding flash of light. The men take cover.
Then the object, whatever it was, lifted up, went up, and then moved back away over the trees.
The speed of the craft leaving the area was, the best way to describe it is probably in a blink of an eye. I've never seen any craft move that fast in my entire Air Force career, and I don't think I ever will again.
As the men slowly rise to their feet, their attention is drawn by another flash of light through the trees. At first, they assume it is the craft, but on second glance, they realize it is the Orford Ness Lighthouse, 5 miles away. Burroughs and Peniston check their radios. They're working again. It is now around 5 a.m., roughly 2 hours since they first spotted the mysterious lights in the woods. They contact the CSC, and their commander orders them to rendezvous with a security team back at the East Gate.
So we were like, what are we going to say? We can't explain what we saw. We can't explain what just happened.
Later that morning, the men are brought in for debriefing. Peniston is reluctant to divulge everything he witnessed.
It was not a good career move to report exactly what we seen. I went into the shift commander's office with Burroughs, and we gave a sanitized briefing of what happened that night.
After the debriefing, Peniston says the shift commander issues him a thinly veiled warning.
Gentlemen, he says, Project Blue Book ended in 1969, and sometimes things are best left alone.
Project Blue Book was the code name for the U.S. Air Force's controversial UFO investigation unit.
During the course of our investigation,
before it was disbanded, its goal was to determine if UFOs were a potential threat to national security. Despite his commander's warning, Sergeant Peniston can't put the strange encounter out of his mind.
I got back to my house and I couldn't go to sleep. I'd probably sat around the house for maybe 2 or 3 hours. And finally I said, well, I got to go back out there.
He returns to the site with some plaster of Paris. His plan? To make casts of any indentations left by the craft.
I wasn't going to leave there until I had answers. I wanted something tangible.
He spots 3 round impressions in a symmetrical pattern on the ground. They are a few inches deep and roughly 10 feet apart.
They measured exactly the same distance apart, each of the pods, approximately 2 to 3 inches thick.
These are the casts made by Peniston the morning after his sighting. He believes they show the marks left by the craft when it landed on the forest floor. He decides not to show them to his superiors. Along with his notes and roll of film, the sergeant now has the 3 plaster molds to help back up his story. But Peniston's physical evidence doesn't solve the mystery of Rendlesham. Just 2 nights later, the UFO returns. And this time, the deputy base commander makes a chilling record of his own encounter.
Well, we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
Late December 1980. Sightings of a mysterious craft at the Woodbridge Bentwaters NATO complex in Suffolk, England, have put many airmen on edge. The strange encounters began the night of the 25th, when airmen reported seeing unusual lights. By the early morning hours of the 26th, 2 men claimed to have come within a few feet of a landed craft in the neighboring forest. It's now the evening of the 27th. 40-year-old Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt attends a holiday party at the Officers Club. His celebration is cut short when one of his men arrives looking distressed.
He showed up just white as a sheet. And he wasn't the type of person to get too excited too easily. He was a former Marine. He said, "It's back." We looked at each other and said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO."
After 2 nights of disturbing stories, Halt decides to investigate for himself.
The police were spending more time looking in the sky than they were at the airplanes they were supposed to be protecting. It's time to put this to rest.
Halt instructs a 3-man security team to assemble their gear and meet him at his quarters. Within minutes, they head toward the Rendlesham Forest. By the time Halt arrives, a security cordon has been established around the perimeter of the woods. Halt is briefed on the situation and is told that the UFO is no longer visible. But the men are experiencing mysterious outages in their high-powered floodlights, called light-alls. Halt and his team collect their gear, a still camera, a Geiger counter for measuring radiation, and a night vision device called a starscope.
I took my small personal cassette recorder, which I carry just about everywhere with me, just to record the events.
The team heads into the dark woods.
And I was going to investigate and show that there was definitely a good, reasonable explanation for everything.
The following is the recording Halt made that night.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Having a lift going, we can't get the light all to work. Seems to be some kind of mechanical problem.
Along with the malfunctioning light-alls, Halt's team encounters the same radio interference experienced by Burroughs and Penniston 2 nights prior. They are walking through the area where Burroughs and Penniston reported seeing the unidentified craft, when Halt notices gashes in the bark of several trees. It looks as if they have been struck by a large object. Halt orders one of his men to take photographs.
He took pictures of the indentations of the trees and everything. He was taking snap, snap, snap all the time.
The Geiger counter begins registering high levels of radiation, but only in the areas surrounding the alleged landing site.
You're getting readings on the tree you're taking samples from on the side facing the suspected landing site? 4 clicks max. Up to 4. Interesting. That's right where you're taking the sample now. 4. That's the strongest point on the tree? Yes, sir. If you come to the back, there's no clicks whatsoever.
Suddenly, the dark woods are alive with sound.
We're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. It's very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
All the animals in the forest were acting up, making a lot of noise, and the barnyard animals from the farm, which was on the adjacent side of the particular location, were also acting up.
One of his men points out a glowing light in the distance. With his tape recorder rolling, Halt documents every moment of this encounter.
You just saw a light where? Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again.
Watch.
Straight ahead off my flash right there. So there it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
We saw this bright red glowing object. It looked like an eye. It's the best way I can describe it. It was bright red, had a dark center, and appeared like as though it were winking.
We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. Yes, it's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
It was moving through the trees, horizontally, but also traveling vertically. In other words, it was zigzagging through the trees and dripping what appeared to be, the best way I can describe it, as molten metal.
Holt and his men pursue the object into a nearby field.
As we approached, it receded, it went away from us. It went out into the farmer's field. It stayed there for probably 20, 30 seconds, maybe a little more.
The pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
And then it silently exploded and broke into multiple white objects. So we went into the field and searched around on the ground looking for burnt marks or evidence of whatever was coming off the object.
The men find nothing in the field. Overhead, the object makes a sudden turn.
It approached us at very, very high speed.
Oh, hey, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
It stopped overhead and sent down a beam. The best way I can describe it is like a laser beam.
Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It was a steady, constant beam as far as the diameter. It fell at our feet, and we all just were in awe. And I thought, was it trying to signal? Is it trying to warn us? Is it threatening us? And just as suddenly as it appeared, the light went click and was off.
The object speeds away. The team watches, mesmerized, as it moves over the base and continues to beam lights to the ground. To some, it appears that the light is beaming directly into the base's weapons storage area, where nuclear missiles are reportedly housed.
There's one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon, still moving erratic and similar lights and beaming down this area.
At this point, Holt's recorder runs out of tape. A craft is still hovering in the distance, but Holt and his team aren't sure what to do next. There's no protocol for what they've just encountered. Unnerved and exhausted, the men head back to base. Airman John Burroughs, who had witnessed a UFO 2 nights earlier, arrives at the site, along with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. Burroughs is immediately concerned by the behavior of the men returning from the field.
They were kind of, I don't know, they were weird. I mean, they were upset.
After a brief conversation, Burroughs spots a blue light glowing in the same clearing Holt has just examined. The airman is determined to investigate further.
I was bugging him, come on, Colonel, let me go out and see. I want to see what it is. So he finally authorized myself and Bustinza to go forward to get a closer look.
The men head toward the strange blue glow in the field. Adrenaline quickly takes over, and Burroughs breaks into a run.
As I was getting close to whatever it was, all of a sudden it was gone.
The field is thrown into darkness, leaving the airmen scared and confounded.
It just was gone. And I'm standing out in the field, and there's nothing there.
Burroughs turns to Bustinza in disbelief.
And he goes, what happened to you? And I go, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, and you were like involved in the lights. He said, you were just like, it was like all of a sudden you were there and then you were in the lights and you were gone.
Burroughs and Bustinza return to base. Burroughs' second encounter with the bizarre lights leaves him with nothing but questions. They are unaware that a sweeping investigation involving covert government agencies is already underway. The men claim that as they headed back to the base that night, they were walking into a government conspiracy. January 1981. Rumors are swirling around the Woodbridge Bentwaters air bases in eastern England after mysterious UFOs are sighted by the U.S. Air Force personnel stationed there.
Many of them were some years into their tour of duty. These were highly trained witnesses. It's not as if they'd all just turned up there the night before.
The military investigation that followed remains controversial to this day. Those who say they witnessed the UFOs believe the military was more interested in damage control than in finding the truth.
What our government did in the name of secrecy to these individuals is absolutely shameful.
According to these airmen, they soon became unwilling participants in a government cover-up. Initially, the investigation follows standard military procedure. Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt, a witness himself, begins debriefing the airmen who reported seeing the craft.
I had no choice. I couldn't ignore it. There were so many witnesses and so many people at so many different places.
John Burroughs, who witnessed the UFOs on both nights, says his interview is clear-cut.
He took our statements, kind of looked at them, said it was really a wild thing, and there's really no explanation for what's going on, and that's how it was kind of left.
Others, like Sergeant Jim Peniston, say that after their meeting with Holt, a long and disturbing process begins. 2 weeks after his initial interview, Peniston is called for another debriefing. This time, it is with a high-ranking team of investigators, the OSI.
The OSI is the Office of Special Investigations. It's, how shall I say, the discreet police is one way to put it.
And they are there to police the US Air Force. And they can actually walk into an office of a general and, you know, even arrest him, if you like. That's how powerful they are.
When Peniston enters the room, the mood is ominous. He begins to give a statement and offers the investigators sketches and notes of his encounter. According to Peniston, the rest of the interview is a blur. To this day, he has a difficult time recalling precisely what tactics the OSI used to extract his information.
They took extra steps to make sure I was telling the truth. Sodium pentothal. I'm sure I gave a release for that. And hope that they understood that everything I said was the truth. I believe I gave my permission for that, I would think.
To Peniston, the military's investigation takes on a sinister tone as more men are called in for questioning. Shortly after the event, Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, who had accompanied John Burroughs to the field, is led to a room beneath the base for questioning. Even now, Bustinza refuses to speak publicly about the events of that night. According to author Georgina Bruni, he later confided in her.
They said to him, look, you know, what you saw was a light from the local lighthouse. And he said, no, I saw much more than that. It was more than that. No, you don't get the picture, do you? And they would not let him go until he agreed that what he saw was the lighthouse. And the moment they said to him, bullets are cheap, a dime a dozen, is when he said, okay, it was the lighthouse.
Other witnesses also say they are told to drop their stories about seeing a UFO.
We were told that we couldn't talk about it, was to treat it as top secret, and that was it. We never talked about it.
According to Airman Burroughs, the signs of a government cover-up are obvious. Shortly after his interrogation, Burroughs is back on guard duty. As he makes his rounds, he can see that the woods are bustling with activity.
There was vehicles leaving Woodbridge going out into the forest. There was helicopters flying around out there, so there was some stuff going on out there. Exactly what, I don't know.
Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt is also aware of covert activities going on at the base.
I heard some stories that were substantiated by several people that a plane load of people did come in a day or so later and did do a lot of investigating.
Peniston and Holt claim they took pictures of the mysterious craft they encountered. But when the prints return from the base's photo lab, they are blank.
The pictures are whited out, most of them. I thought that was really unusual, and I believe that the photos that I got were intentionally just whited out photographs. That's what I believe.
Even Lieutenant Colonel Holt, the highest-ranking eyewitness, believes he is being kept in the dark by the military. As the investigation continues, he's asked to type up a memo based on his interviews with other witnesses and submit it to his superiors. Holt's understanding is that the document will be shared with the British government. Holt does as he is told and submits a memo entitled Unexplained Lights. He writes, the individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object in the forest. The object was described as being metallic in appearance and triangular in shape. It is not a definitive report. Many of the details are missing or incorrect, and the descriptions at times are vague.
The memo was not meant for public consumption. It was meant as a tickler, if you will, to the Ministry of Defense to get them involved to do a proper investigation.
His superiors filed the memo away, and the strange lights never returned to the base. Eventually, rumors of an extraterrestrial craft die down. For 3 years, the public is kept in the dark about what happened at the air bases. Then, in 1983, a new witness surfaces with a startling claim about the UFO encounter, one that will only deepen the mystery of Rendlesham. October 2nd, 1983. The British Sunday tabloid News of the World hits newsstands with the headline, "UFO lands in Suffolk," and that's official. The article claims that a mysterious craft, moving under intelligent control, invaded the skies above the Woodbridge-Bentwaters air bases in late December 1980. But most intriguing is the offering of a piece of written evidence, an official U.S. Air Force memo confirming the alleged sightings. The document was written by one of the men who encountered the mysterious object, Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt.
Every local radio, TV station, Japanese TV, German TV, I had people swarming all over the place wanting to know the real story.
From there onwards, every single newspaper in the United Kingdom was featuring this story for about a week.
The memo, titled Unexplained Lights, offers a brief description of the late December encounters. It includes Jim Peniston's description of a strange object that maneuvered through the trees, as well as Halt's account of a red sun-like object in the night sky. But how was the story leaked to the public? The document, known as the Halt Memo, was brought to light by Larry Warren, a former Air Force security policeman at Bentwaters. He's blunt when he explains why he did it.
I wanted to drag people right by their hair through the thing and say, this happened.
He was the one who brought this whole thing to public attention. It was his information specifically that resulted in a Freedom of Information Act that resulted in the release of the so-called Halt document. And once that single sheet of paper was out, the toothpaste was out of the tube.
Warren has received both praise and criticism for his candidness. The story he tells begins like the others, but the ending is even more bizarre. In late 1980, Warren was a 19-year-old security policeman stationed at Bentwaters. According to Warren, after midnight on December 29th, he is removed from his post and ordered to the woods to assist with Colonel Halt's investigation. When he reaches a clearing, he sees a group of military personnel surrounding a glowing object.
In this field was this object on the ground. It's like a science fiction movie, but there was something alive associated with it. Didn't come out any doors, there were no windows, it was this thing, and it was changing all the time.
As he draws within a few feet of the craft, Warren says he witnesses an amazing sight. There are officers and airmen facing the object, and 3 small glowing entities standing in the light.
What he observes and the other men observe that are in proximity is 3 humanoid shapes.
There was something separate from it with these 3, what you would perceive as kids.
Warren then watches as a senior officer begins communicating with the beings.
The senior people there seemed to be following like a protocol. It seemed to be there was a procedure.
Warren is then pulled from the clearing. He's given no explanation for what he's just seen. The next day, he says he is brought into a room with other witnesses for debriefing. He remembers a film projector and 3 men in suits.
They showed us the different films of UFO military activity going back probably, I don't know, the 40s.
Like other witnesses, Warren says the more he is questioned, the more distorted his memories become. He remembers what happens next as a series of scenes that make little sense. Warren recalls being taken against his will by men in dark suits, then being led to an underground facility on the base.
I remember being on a table and people talking to me and, you know, doctors and Air Force people behind them. I have another memory of being in a kind of like a mess hall and trying to eat something and kind of being alone at a table. It's imagery. I mean, this could all have been plugged into my head.
Warren says he isn't sure if what he remembers is real, or if these images were planted by military investigators in order to confuse him and distract him from what really occurred. After the Rendlesham story breaks, Warren's accusations infuriate other witnesses. These airmen and officers say they too want the truth revealed, but that Warren's story is anything but.
It hurt the whole incident as far as this is, something really did happen to us, but there's no way, the way he was describing it, what happened to us, and it wasn't fair to the people that were involved to have that kind of extreme stuff come out.
Parts of his story do correspond with other eyewitness accounts. Warren, like Charles Halt and Jim Peniston, recalls seeing a glowing craft in the clearing of the Rendlesham Woods shortly after Christmas 1980. But Larry Warren is the only airman who claims he saw alien life forms. Another problem with Warren's version of events is that no one can remember seeing him in the woods on the night in question.
Nobody ever recalls him being out there that night. Nobody I've talked to all the players and just about everybody that was on the, even the fringes, and nobody remembers seeing Larry Warren anywhere except around the base in training.
Warren remains steadfast in his convictions.
I've never lost a minute's sleep over my role in this. I've never intentionally misrepresented anything, lied, or tried to gain anything unfairly.
The contradictions surrounding the Rendlesham case have proven frustrating for UFO researchers. While there are multiple credible witnesses, airmen trained to be good observers and remain calm under extreme circumstances, the discrepancies between their stories are difficult to ignore. In the years that follow, researchers struggle to unravel the mystery. Then, in 2002, declassified government files reveal new facts about those mysterious nights in the woods.
Which could have been the spot where the alien craft landed.
Since 1983, the Rendlesham UFO incident has garnered attention around the world. But to this day, there is still no explanation for what U.S. Air Force personnel claimed they saw in the woods and skies of Suffolk, England. Some experts who have reviewed the reports of strange lights and a glowing spacecraft have concluded that these sightings are a simple case of optical illusion. Retired Air Force Major and astronomer James McGahey learned about the incident by chance.
I first heard about the Rendlesham Forest case in 1983 when I was at the base conducting a military exercise there on temporary duty.
During his tour, he discovers that 5 miles from the twin bases, on the shores of the North Sea, sits the Orford Ness Lighthouse. McGahey feels that witnesses mistook this lighthouse for a UFO.
If you're out in a dark sky on a cold night in December, and a lighthouse is swinging through the trees with this bright beam of light passing through the trees, it's going to have some strange, unusual effects. Light is going to get scattered by the trees.
John Burroughs did mention this lighthouse in his first statement to his superiors. In the report, he says that after the mysterious lights disappeared, he thought the lighthouse was another craft, but quickly realized his mistake.
I want to clarify something. This is always somebody tries to twist it. If you read the statement, especially mine, it clearly distinguishes between what we saw at the beginning and then we did see a beacon light and we followed it. Nowhere in my statement does it say I felt the beacon light was the object.
I've done a whole lot of research on this lighthouse. You know, you can talk about it from here to eternity. And there's absolutely no way that a lighthouse can travel 5 miles, go in and out of trees, shoot beams down to the ground. So anyway, it's not a lighthouse.
But McGahey claims there is a second explanation for the lights in the sky that has nothing to do with UFOs.
On the night of the 25th, at around 9:30 in the evening, a Cosmos satellite re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. It would have looked like a fireball, which is a very, very bright meteor.
For nearly 20 years, skeptics and believers continue their search for answers. In 2002, thanks in part to researchers like Georgina Bruni, the British government finally releases a new set of records. The files provide additional information about the case, but also raise new questions. They make it clear that the British government investigated the mysterious sightings back in 1981. This fact seems to indicate that military investigators did not believe the sightings were caused by a lighthouse or a satellite. But the files also reveal some of the shortcomings of that investigation.
We discovered that some of the radar facilities were actually faulty. The cameras were faulty on the nights in question, or allegedly faulty, that the films were missing.
At the time, investigators based their research on the original memo written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. His document states that the first event occurred on December 27th, but the sightings actually began on the 25th. Holt's mistake has caused researchers to examine the wrong nights for 20 years. It is a frustrating revelation for Nick Pope, an official with the Ministry of Defense.
Here we had possibly the most significant UFO event ever to have taken place on British soil, and yet not only were the dates wrong, but crucial days had been lost.
Moreover, much has been left out of the files. Researchers hope the U.S. and British governments will release further information, including pictures taken by Air Force personnel on the nights of the sightings. These are the only photographs that remain from the investigation. They show authorities examining the alleged landing site, but the pictures reveal no evidence of a landed craft. The U.S. Air Force's official stance is that the events were no threat to national security. To many, this statement doesn't ring true. If, in fact, nuclear weapons were housed at the base, then the military would have been very concerned about reports of an unidentified aircraft.
We had objects flying over the weapon storage area, shining beams down to the ground. If that ain't defense significance, what is?
Skeptics grapple with the same question, but in their minds, the military's response bolsters their claim that UFOs did not visit the Rendlesham Forest.
This was during the Cold War. You have to realize that security was fairly tight. Anything that would happen near the flight line when you have these high-value asset aircraft, tactical aircraft, or in weapons areas would immediately cause a response by the entire base. Everybody on the base would have been woken up and been reacting to something like that. And of course, that didn't happen.
Even Charles Holt, the deputy base commander, is frustrated with his search for answers.
I kept prodding Squadron Leader Moreland, the British liaison officer, for an answer. Doesn't somebody care? Isn't somebody interested? I got the feeling that I was kind of left hanging out there to dry, if you know what I mean.
Though they continue to press the government for more information, some researchers believe that the missing files and early mistakes in the military investigation may leave the Rendlesham case a lasting mystery.
In any investigation, whatever you're investigating, if you don't really use the first 24 hours to try and chase it down, your chances of success diminish rapidly. The problem with the Rendlesham incident is that this happened over the Christmas period. A lot of the key personnel were on leave, and I think there was a bit of a decision-making vacuum.
The newly released information is not enough for the men involved at Rendlesham to put the incident to rest. For now, they possess the few pieces of intriguing evidence that remain from their strange encounter. Peniston's plaster casts and drawings. Holt's tape recording.
We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm.
Jim Penniston, Larry Warren, and John Burroughs continue to wonder why the government is hiding the truth.
There's a chain of command, there's a chain of custody, everything's kept track of. And for this stuff to play it like it disappeared and it's gone, it's not.
I guess technically we were part of a cover-up to ourselves. We probably started it by sanitizing it, the initial report.
Like John Lennon used to say, conspiracy is silence speaks louder than words, and that's fact. And I'll be pissing off people as long as I can about this and screaming that this went down, take a look at it, then judge for yourself.
In America, everyone's heard of Roswell, but only the UFO researchers really know about this case, and yet, in many ways, I consider this case to be bigger than Roswell. This could be the biggest UFO incident of all time. Let's put it where it deserves to be. Let's put it in people's minds.
People keep telling me, well, what really happened? I don't know. What was it? I really don't know. I mean, I don't.
Through Shag Harbour, just past the post office, we happened to look out through the window and we see a light, then there was 2 on, then 3 on, then there was 4 on. It seemed to be flying along like just level. A yellowish orangish colour, I guess the colour of the lights was.
Racing west along Highway 3, Wickens attempts to keep the strange lights in view. But the noiseless objects begin descending at a 45-degree angle and drop below the tree line.
Seemed to be going along with us, and then when we got to the bottom of the hill, we lost sight of it.
A few miles away, 18-year-old Norman Smith is riding home with a friend through Bear Point Woods and sees something similar in the sky.
We were chasing the girls, and we were coming on our way home, and when we first noticed the lights in the sky.
The sight of the strange illuminated shapes is enough to make them pull over and watch.
We stopped alongside the road. I got out, was looking at the lights. It was stopped in midair. There was 5 lights. The lowest light to the ground was like if you were looking at a full moon, and then the next one just kept getting smaller, the next one smaller. There was no sound, you couldn't hear anything.
Smith gazes at the lights for a few moments as curiosity grows into unsettling concern.
I know I was frightened because I didn't know what it was. Never seen lights like that before in my life.
Down the road, Laurie Wickens and his friends are still in hot pursuit of the strange object. They suddenly see a bright flash and hear a whistling sound like a falling bomb. They believe it may be falling into the harbor, so they speed toward the waterfront.
The minute we come over the top of the hill, we could see the light in the water. At the time, we thought it was a plane.
Wickens pulls into a vacant parking lot by the shore to get a better look.
The light we see in the harbor looked like a half a globe, a yellowish colored light. We could see it drifting down the harbor. That was the first thing coming to mind, is go call the RCMP and report that we'd seen a plane crash, because that's what we thought it was.
Wickens returns to his car, races to the nearest payphone, and calls the regional headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the country's national police force. It is known throughout Canada as the RCMP. The corporal on duty answers the call at 11:25 and hears Wickens' excited voice.
The Mounties wanted to know what we was drinking, and we said we wasn't drinking, and wanted to know the number for the phone booth.
After listening to Wickens' story, the RCMP officer on duty is skeptical, but as soon as he hangs up, other calls start pouring in. The calls come in from nearby Bear Point, Cape Sable Island, and Maggie Garren's Point, all reporting the same thing. With so many witnesses, the RCMP has no choice but to take this seriously.
We got in the car to leave, and then he called back and wanted to know where he could meet us so we could see it in the water. And I told him we'd be by the moss plank, because that's where it was, right off of there.
Meanwhile, eyewitness Norman Smith is also busy alerting people about the mysterious object above the harbor.
we drove up to my father's place, and I ran in the house, got my father, and he came outdoor. We stood looking at the lights in the sky, and it wasn't too long, probably a couple of minutes, when we see the police car coming and its red lights flashing.
Smith follows the speeding police cruiser to a shoreside parking lot where a crowd of witnesses has gathered.
When we got there was, I think, 16 people, including the police officers. And they were local people. They all seen the lights come down to the ground, and they watched it land in the water.
Civilians and the RCMP officers on the scene observed the dull yellow-orange light drifting 300 yards from shore.
It was totally dark. All you could see was the lights, and it was on the water.
We watched the light for probably 10 minutes as it was drifting down the harbor. We walked to the top of the hill, and then the light just went out. It just disappeared.
Everyone is convinced that they have just witnessed a plane crash. At 11:38 p.m., one of the officers puts a call through to the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, the branch of the Canadian military that organizes search and rescue operations. The Coast Guard cutter in nearby Clark's Harbor is also contacted. Lighthouse keepers in the surrounding areas are put on alert.
I was on duty, just carrying out my regular surveillance of our navigational aids. Somewhere around midnight when I first got a call that they were searching for something that crashed in the harbor.
Meanwhile, the RCMP officers improvise their own rescue operation. They begin contacting local fishermen to commandeer boats to go out to the impact site. As word gets out, local residents spring into action.
Someone came to our door, and my husband jumped up and went to the door to see who was there. And it was a policeman. And he said that something had come down in the harbor, and that they thought it was a plane. And that they knew that his boat was at the wharf, and he could get there in a hurry.
I was on my way home from babysitting where I was picked up by a local resident there. He had some urgency in his voice when he said, you've got to go with me because we've got to go search for possible survivors of a plane crash or something of that nature. We really didn't know what we were heading out for.
All we could do was try to get there as fast as we could, and we were rushing. We went down to the wharf, untied the lines, and got the boats clear, and we left there as fast as we could to get to the area.
It's now slightly before midnight. Two fishing boats with several volunteers motor out towards open water at full throttle. Crisscrossing patterns of searchlight beams paint the dark, still waters of the harbor as the search begins.
And what we were doing was looking for something on the water, debris is what we were thinking.
The mood on the boats is tense as the would-be rescuers brace themselves for a grisly scene of floating body parts and plane wreckage. What they actually encounter is even more bizarre.
We came into this foam on the water. It was like orange foam that was on the water, like bubbly foam.
Quite a long streak of it. It was just more or less floating on the water. What it was, I don't know.
The fishermen realized that the mysterious foam is connected to whatever crashed into the harbor. Norman Smith attempts to get a sample of the peculiar substance.
We circled the boat around. We came back into the foam. When we came back into it, I took a small dip net and dipped the dip net down into the water, right into the foam. When I pulled the dip net up out of the foam, there was nothing. You couldn't see nothing, totally nothing on the dip net. I've been fishing all my life, and I never ever seen anything like that. I've been up rivers and on lakes and out on the ocean, and never ever see foam like that on the water.
The strange foam soon melts back into the dark water. But even more puzzling than the foam is the lack of any debris at the site. If something has just crashed into Shag Harbor, it seems to have completely vanished.
We had thought that whatever it was had just sunk. And I was, like you, kind of expecting to find some debris, but there was nothing.
We were out there pretty near all night and circling around and looking for anything else that was on the water, any debris or anything. and we never found nothing. There was not so much as a tin can.
The confusion among the fishermen in Shag Harbor is shared by the individuals back at the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. The RCC checks with the Air Traffic Control Center in Moncton, New Brunswick, and the NORAD Control Center in North Bay, Ontario, to determine whether any civilian, commercial, or military aircraft is missing. The reports of an aircraft crashing into Shag Harbor do not mesh with the data they get back.
They realize that this is not a downed aircraft, none are missing. They're looking for something unconventional. They're starting to realize that perhaps this is some unknown object from space.
The residents are certain that something fell into the dark waters of Shag Harbor, but no one seems to know what it is. Shag Harbor is a small, unassuming fishing village on the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia. It's so inconspicuous that it does not appear on some maps. That is all about to change on October 4th, 1967. Several local residents report what they believe to be a plane crashing into the harbor. The sightings begin a chain of events that will make headlines around the world. Within hours of the initial reports, local fishermen, police officers, and the Coast Guard scour the waters of the harbor throughout the night, but find no wreckage or debris. As the sun rises the next day, the community is gripped by apprehension and uncertainty.
I think everybody that night had the feeling that they were keeping something from us.
Word quickly circulates that no debris has been found. With no information coming from the authorities, speculation spreads like wildfire.
It was the talk of the community, you know, and there was a UFO, and of course, like everybody else, we wondered, I guess, what it could be.
People became fearful. They were wondering, would there be more? Would they tangle in our nets? Would it crash in our house? What's going on here? And they just weren't getting answers.
Finally, the Rescue Coordination Center issues a statement that rules out the possibility of a plane crash. At 10:20 a.m. on October 5th, the center sends a telex stamped priority to the Canadian Forces headquarters in Ottawa. The message outlines the sightings by the Shag Harbor residents and the RCMP officers. It refers to the thing in Shag Harbor as a dark object. More important, it labels the object in question as a UFO.
It's unique also in that, again, the term UFO is first used by the authorities who are searching and not by the eyewitnesses.
By the evening of October 5th, the Shag Harbor incident has become a military matter. After reviewing the telex from the Rescue Coordination Center, Squadron Leader William Bain sends an urgent message to the Canadian Maritime Command, Canada's naval headquarters for the Atlantic coast. It advises an immediate underwater search of the area. If the mysterious dark object left nothing floating in the sea, perhaps the dive teams can find something below the surface. Maritime Command responds by dispatching a team of divers from the Navy's Fleet Diving Unit in Halifax. They arrive on October 6th and begin diving off the deck of Coast Guard Cutter 101.
You get all kinds of rumors in a small village like this, and then when the Navy shows up with divers and stuff, where you know that they must have taken it seriously because so many people saw the event in the sky.
The divers section off an area of the harbor roughly 1/2 mile long by 1.5 miles wide.
Well, they'd go over the side and start doing square searches. They'll pick an area and normally stake it off with a buoy on the bottom. The visibility in the waters of Nova Scotia, it's so full of plankton and so on, is usually quite limited, you know, maybe 20 feet at the most.
It was a low-tech search, simply with handheld flashlights under the water.
They wouldn't let us anywhere near that area. We were out there in the boat all right, but we had to stay back away from where they were diving.
As the divers are scouring the depths of the harbor, the tiny fishing village is thrust into the media spotlight. On October 7th, a camera crew from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation arrives and films the divers in action. This is actual footage from their news coverage. Canada's major newspapers have also gotten wind of the strange happenings. Among the first to jump on the breaking story is journalist Ray McLeod of Halifax's Chronicle Herald newspaper.
I was one of the night reporters on duty at the Chronicle Herald. when the assignment editor just called me over and said there's a report of something going down in the harbor. A lot of people had seen it. CMP reported they'd seen it. And the newspaper wanted to find out what had crashed.
But when McLeod attempts to find out what went into the harbor, no one has any answers.
I started following up on what we got from RCMP and what we got from Search and Rescue, and that was they had no idea what had gone down. They had nothing missing. They had seen nothing drop off the radar screen anywhere in the area, and they were basically puzzled.
The lack of information surrounding the incident raises McLeod's curiosity and inspires him to launch his own investigation.
Anytime you don't know, it teases your imagination. You have to wonder why they don't know. When the armed forces and everyone was saying, we have no idea, we can't find anything, that's when I used one of my sources in the armed forces to get a number of someone in Ottawa.
McLeod's source refers him to Squadron Leader William Bain at the Air Desk in Ottawa, a division of the Royal Canadian Air Force in charge of investigating UFO cases. Bain's response to the Shag Harbor incident is surprising.
Just from what he'd heard so far, it looked like one of those few cases where there might be something concrete to the incident. And that, of course, was the quote that ended up in the headline of the paper.
On October 7th, 1967, McLeod's article makes the front page of the ultra-conservative newspaper, the Chronicle Herald. McLeod is as surprised as anyone to see it there.
And then the story came out, and my first reaction was, oh my God, what have I done? Okay, I never expected to see that screaming headline.
It was a headline in 2-inch red letters that looked more like something you would see in the National Enquirer. And that served to fuel, again, the rumor mill and the speculation.
The shockwaves of McLeod's article reverberate throughout the Canadian province and reach the depths of Shag Harbor, where the underwater search is in progress. On October 7th, Maritime Command orders 3 additional divers to the impact site. As the dives continue, the people of Shag Harbor want answers. None are forthcoming.
I guess there was a considerable amount of secrecy about the whole mission because they didn't reveal anything to us. Some people were told that we weren't allowed to speak about it.
We thought that in a few days' time we was going to be hearing, yes, there was a plane that went down, it was on the bottom of the ocean, or whatever it was that they found. We thought that in a few days they were going to be telling us, but nobody ever did.
Maritime Command terminates the underwater search on October 8th. They announced that 3 days of searching the harbor have yielded nil results. 5 days after the sightings, the residents of Shag Harbor are no closer to understanding what crashed into the water the night of October 4th. But the end of the underwater search is just the beginning of a UFO case that is about to become even more perplexing. October 1967. After dozens of witnesses see something plunge into Shag Harbor on the southern tip of Nova Scotia, local fishermen comb the waters looking for clues, and Navy divers search beneath the surface. But the Canadian Navy abruptly cancels the search with no explanation, leaving the people of Shag Harbor to wonder and worry.
In a lot of our minds, it was a cover-up for something, but for them to spend that much time and effort and then give no explanation, it's like they were here today and gone tomorrow type of thing.
With no one providing any answers, the rumor mill begins to churn.
There was even a rumor at the time that they had found something.
We thought that there was times that they were bringing things up off of the bottom of the ocean.
The guy that had the divers in the area, he did admit that they did bring something up. Wrapped underwater, it was wrapped underwater. But I guess that was kept a secret.
Speculation was rampant, but speculation is always rampant when you don't give someone an explanation.
During the 1960s, speculation about UFOs and other unexplained events often turns to the Cold War. The nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union is at its height. The two superpowers are constantly seeking to trump each other by harnessing the latest military technology. Top secret exercises are common in the North Atlantic. The heated atmosphere produces anxieties that intensify concerns about the incident.
It was always in people's minds, and of course, you know, this is just a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things, so, you know, this added fuel to the fire.
And then, of course, people start coming up with theories. Maybe it was a secret American device of some sort, a plane, a satellite that went into the water. Or was it a Russian object?
Night reporter Ray McLeod helps break the news about Shag Harbor by writing a front-page article in Halifax's Chronicle-Herald newspaper. As McLeod prepares to follow up on the story, he receives some startling and discouraging news.
There was a note on my typewriter to see the managing editor. And I was told, don't follow up this story. We think this story should be handled by someone on Dayside because a lot of the contacts are easier to get in the day and we want to follow this up thoroughly. So we've given the story to David Bentley. You're off the story.
McLeod asserts that Bentley confers with scientists and academics to downplay the UFO angle.
He pursued talking to people who basically poo-pooed the story and told everybody there's nothing to it, it was all right.
Among Bentley's chief sources is one of Canada's most outspoken UFO debunkers, an astronomer named Father Burt Gaffney.
The late Father Michael Burt Gaffney was a Jesuit priest. He was an astronomer. He was a UFO skeptic. He took a very dim view of what the UFO phenomena possibly could be. And in statements to the press, he would downplay that interest.
In a public lecture a few weeks after the Shag Harbor sightings, Burt Gaffney tries to alleviate any lingering concerns about what happened that night by arguing that 94% of all UFO sightings can be explained by meteorites, simple mirages, and other natural phenomena. With UFO skeptics having their say, McLeod begins to wonder what happened to Squadron Leader William Bain, the source at the Canadian military, quoted as saying that there might be something concrete to the Shag Harbor incident.
I asked Bentley why he wasn't following up on Squadron Leader Bain. And Bentley told me that he was told the man didn't exist and there was no such office in Ottawa and to leave that angle in the story alone.
Is the Chronicle-Herald bowing to pressure from the Canadian government? McLeod ultimately realizes that the side of the story he began to pursue would never make it into the newspapers.
I feel badly in some ways that I couldn't have used my talent and my contacts and my belief that the people have a right to know to keep plugging away until we found out what was going on. A journalist feels empty when they have to do that, but then again, sometimes you have to do that.
Soon, news of Canada's Shag Harbor sightings travels across the border and reaches renowned physicist Dr. Edward Condon and his team at the University of Colorado. Condon and his committee are working under a $500,000 contract from the United States Air Force and putting together an independent scientific assessment of unexplained UFO phenomena.
The Condon report was striving to gather a certain amount of case studies in other countries around the world internationally to see whether the United States Air Force should continue investigating reports of unidentified flying objects. And the Shag Harbor incident came to their attention.
They have deep resources and a distinguished staff, but according to eyewitness Chris Stiles, Condon and his committee do not dedicate much time or effort to the puzzling Shag Harbor case.
The case was turned over to an electrical engineer called Norman Levine. He made a few calls to RCMP headquarters in Ottawa and to Maritime Command, but was assured by them that they had done a complete and thorough search. It's unfortunate that he didn't pursue that path because God knows what he would have found.
Canada's Shag Harbor incident is one of 59 major UFO cases around the world that Condon's team selects to include in their study. They submit the final report to the Air Force on October 31st, 1968. But case number 34 receives only a few paragraphs in the 900-page tome. The report defends the lack of initiative in Shag Harbor by arguing no further investigation by the project was considered justifiable. This conclusion of the Shag Harbor case is consistent with Condon's overview of UFO research. Our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge.
I think one of the things that happens when a serious scientific study is carried out to look at the UFO situation in specific cases, there's often a criteria that's very formal and rigid. And often what happens is the best cases somehow, no matter how you use your definitions, no matter how careful you are, will slip through the cracks. And I believe that's what happened to Shag Harbor.
With no one pushing for answers, Canada's Shag Harbor incident becomes another unexplained mystery that is all but forgotten.
It quickly faded from the headlines and became a back-page story, and a month later it would have been hard to find anything on it, and people went home, made a sandwich, went to work, life went on.
But 25 years later, a new investigation is launched into the Shag Harbor incident. This time, some startling revelations make it clear that the book should never have been closed on this case. In October of 1967, over a dozen witnesses see a UFO plunge into Shag Harbor, Canada. 25 years later, unanswered questions remain.
That's where it all took place, right out there. We knew that something came down out of the air and something landed in the water. But what it was, we didn't know.
One of the other eyewitnesses that night cannot forget what he saw over the harbor. Chris Stiles had seen the UFO from his home in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. In 1992, while watching TV one night, everything would change.
I had watched a rebroadcast of the Unsolved Mysteries episode that dealt with the Roswell incident. And it made me think about Shag Harbor. And what I remembered and what was so tantalizing about Shag Harbor was that there was no denial that the authorities believed that this was a genuine UFO incident. And it had simply faded from memory.
Stiles decides to launch his own investigation into Shag Harbor. He requests documents from the Canadian National Archives and the Department of National Defence using Canada's Access to Information Act. In a few weeks, the government documents arrive on spools of microfilm at the main branch of the Halifax Library. A tedious search begins.
As you sit at the viewer and start going through document after document, you realize that often these collections were compiled by bureaucrats who threw away nothing.
The microfilm contains thousands of documents of UFO cases across Canada from 1965 to 1981.
You're looking for an extraterrestrial straw in a terrestrial haystack.
Stiles spends weeks at the microfilm viewer until he hits pay dirt. It was all there. Priority telexes from the Rescue Coordination Center to the Canadian Forces Headquarters. Instructions from the Canadian Maritime Command to the Atlantic Fleet Diving Unit. And reports by dozens of witnesses. Stiles realizes that he is looking at the biggest UFO event in Canada's history.
And I only saw one that had UFO written on it with 3 big letters, underlined 3 times, and that had to do with the Shag Harbor incident. I knew very early on that I had primary documents and a paper trail a mile wide here.
Has Chris Stiles stumbled upon a Canadian government cover-up? Stiles decides he needs help. He contacts fellow UFO researcher Don Ledger to assist with his investigation.
Chris Stiles was very passionate about Shag Harbor. He'd been at it for about a year to a year and a half at that point, researching it, digging out the documents and so on. And he was infectious, eventually dragged me into it as well.
A careful examination of these declassified documents paints a vivid timeline of the events and helps bring the night of October 4th, 1967 back to life.
I was very impressed with the paper trail for the Shag Harbor incident. It just pretty much laid out the whole thing.
For Stiles, the documents also suggest that the Canadian military knew more than they were telling.
I think what surprised me most was how comfortable these military people seemed with the possibility that they might actually be looking for an object of extraterrestrial origin. In a sense, it was kind of an acknowledgement of UFO reality.
Stiles uncovers documents that demonstrate that the sightings of October 4th were not confined to Shag Harbor alone. Reports came in from witnesses from all over Nova Scotia that night. He then comes across eyewitness testimony from an unexpected but extremely reliable source, experienced airline pilots. At 7:15 p.m. on October 4th, 1967, two pilots on Air Canada Flight 305 are flying at an altitude of 12,000 feet over southeastern Quebec. Captain Pierre Charbonneau and First Officer Robert Ralph glance out of the left cockpit window and see something astounding.
What they saw that night was a large, round, colored object in the sky that looked like, to them, like a kite with a tail on it. It was off their left wing and just slightly above their altitude.
The experienced pilots are at a loss. They observe the strange shape for several minutes when suddenly they see a series of explosions. According to their testimony, they begin to take evasive action when the UFO disappears into a wisp of clouds. After some deliberation, the pilots decide to file official reports about the bizarre occurrence.
It's not common for pilots to go on record and report a UFO, particularly commercial pilot, because of maybe some recrimination later on from his employers, or maybe some ridicule from his peers.
Continuing his research, Stiles uncovers more information from an unexpected source. At St. Mary's University in Halifax, Stiles finds a treasure trove of X-Files collected by none other than the UFO skeptic who had downplayed the Shag Harbor incident in the press, Father Burke Gaffney.
And an X-file is not just a secret file, but a file that is not admitted to by the originating agency. So it was great that they were there because there was no record of these in Ottawa, either at National Archives or RCMP headquarters.
The RCMP X-Files collected by Burke Gaffney provide more telling details about the night of October 4th. One report includes the testimony of a ship captain named Leo Mercy.
He's the captain of a fishing dragger that has 18 men. It's off the coast of Sambor, Nova Scotia. And it's got 4 UFOs in the distance in a box pattern.
And he looked at them, and then he went and he checked, and he found them on radar.
But Mercy's report contains something even more puzzling, a reference to another underwater search near Shelburne, 31 miles northeast of Shag Harbor.
His statement in this X-file, he says, perhaps it's like the thing they're looking for down off Shelburne or off Shag Harbor. So this would seem that there was indeed a second simultaneous search effort.
Did the UFO somehow travel away from Shag Harbor after it crashed? As it happens, the town of Shelburne is also home to a former Canadian military base. Is it somehow connected to the secrecy surrounding the Shag Harbor sightings? In fact, during the 1960s, the Shelburne facility was officially called an Oceanographic Institute, but its real identity was shrouded in Cold War intrigue. In its heyday, it served as a top-secret listening post to track Soviet submarine movements in the North Atlantic Ocean for the U.S. Navy.
A Soviet submarine would come out in the Atlantic from Russia and go on its tour. They would pick up the engine noises and the hull sounds made by the submarine passing through the water on the microphones. This would be fed into a computer so they could get a match later on for if the same submarine came up.
Could the Canadian authorities have used this submarine tracking technology to locate a submerged UFO? Was the Navy secretly searching the waters off Shelburne while all eyes were focused on Shag Harbor? To continue his investigation, Stiles sets out to track down those who would know best, the divers who actually probed the depths of Shag Harbor. On October 4th, 1967, Chris Stiles was one of many witnesses who saw something strange in the skies over Nova Scotia. Now he is on the hunt to try to find out what it was. He has uncovered declassified government documents indicating that the Canadian military was involved in an intense search for a UFO that apparently crashed into Shag Harbor. The Canadian authorities assert that nothing was found, but Stiles begins to suspect that the divers may hold the key to the mystery.
A number were unwilling to talk, but a few were. And they told a very interesting tale that went well beyond what was in the press clippings.
April 9th, 1993. One of the divers agrees to an interview with Stiles, but demands that his identity be kept anonymous. Stiles is shocked when the diver informs him that they did indeed find something underwater, but it was not in Shag Harbor.
He eventually explained that by the time divers had arrived in Shag Harbor, they knew the object was no longer there, that indeed it had come to rest on the seabed 25 miles away, off Government Point near the Shelburne base.
Had the UFO eluded the search efforts at Shag Harbor by traveling underwater under its own power up the coast of Nova Scotia? If true, this would mean that the Canadian military conducted a secret search at Shelburne that was then concealed from the public. The diver's new revelation is confounding to Stiles.
I found the Shelburne story very troubling. You know, there were a lot of things that were certain. We had government documents, but now there was a black box element to the case. And at first I was very wary of it, very dubious of the claim.
Now Chris Stiles is wondering if the naval search at Shag Harbor was just an elaborate decoy for the real search the diver is now telling him about. When pressed for details, the diver's story becomes even more incredible.
When the divers were dispatched to the Shelburne location, they dove over the object and found that indeed there was, in fact, even a second object there, which they described as lending assistance to the first. I didn't know what to make of this. This was well beyond events in the Shag Harbor incident.
The diver informs Stiles that a flotilla of U.S. Navy and Canadian ships actually anchored over the two objects at Shelburne and monitored their activities.
And as he said, when he dove, him and a partner, they were shocked to find there was still activity going on, and they indeed saw beings.
They were on the bottom, and they watched what they thought was creatures from one object giving aid to the other object.
The Canadian diver's story does not end there. He says that the Navy flotilla observed the two UFOs for 7 days. Suddenly, the operation was interrupted by a Russian submarine crossing into Canadian territorial waters. At this critical juncture, the Navy ships were diverted to intercept the sub.
They attempt to intercept the Soviet sub, trying to cut it off. And it's at this point, when they're doing this maneuver, that the two UFOs begin to move back toward the Gulf of Maine, and indeed, eventually, as reported, break the surface and fly away.
Are there any witnesses on record that can corroborate the diver's fantastic story? Did anyone see these two UFOs leaving the waters off Shelburne? Perhaps. At 10 o'clock on October 11th, 1967, exactly 1 week after the Shag Harbor sightings, the mysterious lights in the sky were seen once again, this time by a family in Lower Woods Harbor, 35 miles from Shelburne.
We look at what's known as the Lachlan-Cameron sighting 1 week later, to the hour, and we see two sets of lights leaving the area of Shag Harbor and flying away. It fits the diver's story like a glove. It's hard to ignore that synchronicity.
And we are left to wonder, did an alien spacecraft really crash into Shag Harbor as the Navy diver suggests? Or could there be another explanation? An important clue to that question may still exist if what one former lighthouse keeper says is true.
The second day, I did find a cylinder. I knew it was something different, something I had never seen before. It was a cylinder type shape hole, 30 inches, 30 to 40 inches long maybe, 15, 18 inches in diameter. Had been partially burned, wires protruding, terrible odor.
After finding the cylinder on the rocky shore of Bon Portage Island, Banks says he notified the Canadian Department of Transportation. They informed him to carefully pack the object and deliver it to an American naval officer at Prospect Point Wharf.
It had to be something that they needed bad, wanted bad, because they flew
they flew him in from Virginia. Or that's just what he told me.
But what was inside the cylinder that was so urgent and so secret?
I was working for the federal government at the time, and I don't really feel comfortable answering it.
It's an ongoing mystery that continues to invite speculation. For some, the evidence points to the secret military experiments of the Cold War.
Theorized in my own mind that probably this was some kind of an experimental drone or something that they had back then. One of the first ones that they had that somehow got away from them.
I think it was a surveillance type of thing, and it either crashed on its own or they crashed it.
My opinion was still it was a plane, American military plane.
Others contend that something capable of operating both above and below the water can only be extraterrestrial.
Even now in this time of stealth aircraft, we still don't have anything that's both aerodynamic and hydrodynamic.
What the object is, that's what everybody always wants to know. What was the object? Whatever went into the harbor that night was intelligently controlled, and it was of extraterrestrial nature.
It is unclear when, if ever, the complete set of military records will be released. If they are, will they shed light on this strange incident and maybe even settle once and for all what happened in Shag Harbor on October 4th, 1967? Until then, we are left with the mystery, speculation, and the fading memory of the people who saw something very unusual crash into the ocean that night.
Today, I still scan the sky looking for something that might be different or something like what I seen back 30-odd years ago. Only thing that I would like to know is what it was.
A railroad car